Good afternoon, and welcome to another virtual brown bag book review from the Fairport Library. I'm Abby DeVeist. I'm the adult programming librarian, and I'm so pleased that you're here to join us today to hear from our staff and hear about all the wonderful things we're reading. So first off, I'm going to talk about my books, the first being Every Heart a Doorway. It's part of the Wayward Children's series, and it's book number 1. So let me read a little something to set the mood. So children have disappeared under the right conditions, slipping through shadows, under the bed or backs of wardrobes, down rabbit holes, and into old wells, and emerging somewhere else. But magical lands have little need for used up miracle children. So what happens to them when they get thrust back into their real lives? This book tells us about this. It deals with Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. Eleanor West is a woman who visited her own magical land in her childhood and now is taking in those children who have left and come back and helping them deal with either finding their door again or living with the fact that they'll never find their door again. Now, this book is aimed at YA, but I think adults will get a huge kick out of it. It talks about a lot of stories that you may know and a lot of worlds you may have heard referenced before from other literary authors, but in a whole new way. So in this book particular, we follow the main character, Nancy, who slipped away into one of the underworld worlds and came back and dealing with the changes in herself and the way she sees the world and trying to get back there. So we see her adventure. But this book series has several books. So every time we get to follow a new character and a new story. And the joy of these is they're short, so they're fun, quick reads. They're magical little fairy tales that I think every age over the age of 13 will enjoy. Some of the younger kids might find these a little scary, but they're not too bad for the older kid and adult. So I hope you take the time to read this. It may be out of your norm from what you usually read, but I highly suggest it because it was extremely enjoyable. So my next book is called The House in the Cerulean Sea. And this book is also kind of fantasy. It's got magical in it, but I can't recommend this book enough. It follows Linus Baker, who lives a quiet and solitary life. He's in his 40s. He's got a tiny little cat in a tiny little house, in a tiny little job that he hasn't advanced in years and years. He's a caseworker at the department in charge of magical youth, and he spends his days overseeing the well-being of children in government-sanctioned orphanages. These children have special issues or special needs and special powers, but he goes there and he makes sure they're being treated well and reports back to the powers that be. In this story particularly, he gets sent to an island where the most dangerous and unique magical children are kept, to see if they're being treated well, to see if they need to be replaced or the house needs to be closed down, and to report back. He's chosen because he's so impartial and he is so to the point, but his journey leads him through meeting some of the most amazing characters I've read in a story in a long time, and you get to see his heart open throughout this story. Now, this book is a work of fiction, but it has so many parallels with our current world. I was talking with my fiance, Andy, because he read it as well, and we were just talking about how we saw, framed in a magical sense, discrimination and, just outcasts and people not being considered humans because they're different. And it's all in this book, but it's so beautifully written that I can't recommend it enough. I was looking through Goodreads and people said things like, this book is a balm for troubled and cold and cloudy days. This book was a delight. This book is a warm hug and a soft blanket and a cup of tea. This book is a balm for my soul. So I can't tell you enough how small a part the fantasy plays in it and how huge a part experience and connection plays in this book. So I highly recommend The House in the Cerulean Sea. Check it out. Even if you don't like magic and that kind of thing, it's a back burner to the real story that we have in this book, which, as I keep saying, I highly recommend. So now we're going to move away from the fantasy and we're going to go to Carl with a nonfiction and Karrie with a novel.
Hello, I'm Carl, and this week I am reviewing Adams versus Jefferson, the Tumultuous election of 1800 by John Ferling. Fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. Quick read. I was drawn to this election of 1800 for a number of reasons. One, I had read briefly about it in Founding Brothers. I had seen other media and videos discussing this election, so I wanted to read more about it. And when I saw John Ferling, who I've read another one of his books, had written something on Adams versus Jefferson and this election, I decided I had to read it. Another reason why I was drawn to this topic was the election of 2020. And I saw a lot of the parallels between that election and this election. And it is, you see in 1800, it's our, second contested election, but by this point, factions, or as they called it, but what we nowadays call political parties, had developed. And you had the two factions. You had the Federalists, Hamilton Adams belonged to, and then you had the Democratic Republicans, which Jefferson and Madison were members of. So you have these factions, and in 1796 there was no real political machine. Adams won. Jefferson got second place. Jefferson became vice president because there was no political tickets. It was every person for themselves, and he wanted a rematch. Now, there was no campaigning, so it was all their surrogates who did all the kind of campaigning for them, sending out missives and editorials to newspapers across the nation, attacking one, supporting the other. But they stayed above the fray. That was the belief. However, there was a lot of strings being pulled on their end, saying do this, do that. But excellent read, and you get to see a pivotal point in our nation's history, pivotal election, because we were fledgling democracy. This is 12 years under the new Constitution, the Constitution with more federal power, and you see the pushback on that idea of federal power, and that's where the Democratic Republican Party comes about, starting originally with societies across our country and their support of Jefferson. Excellent read. And in the end, you see that there's a tie, but it's not between Adams and Jefferson. This ties between Jefferson and a fellow Federalist, Burr. And you see all that arises too. There's accusations that the Federalists want to assassinate Jefferson. Federalists in the House are talking about ways to ensure that Jefferson doesn't become president. And there is a lot of back and forth because the House, they're the ones who decide the election. There are even some who think that if they could put off deciding the next president, they could keep Adams in power for a while longer. Fascinating read. Great window into our past. I do highly recommend it. And I don't know where I'm going from here, but I will continue with my path through American history, thinking the War of 1812, but we'll see. Enjoy.
Hello, my name is Karrie, and for this brown bag, I reviewed the novel What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez. This novel, like her other novel, which I reviewed of My Friend, they're quite similar. This is type of novel that if you don't want something that's like too deep or in depth, this might be the novel for you. It does deal with a little bit of a serious topic. For the majority of the novel, the narrator, who is unnamed, ends up meeting up with one of her old college roommates and is asked to be with her during an assisted suicide. And leading up to that are a bunch of interactions, which seem a lot like observations of the narrator moving through, through time until she gets to the point of this conversation with her old roommate. And it's not a very long novel. It's not like a dark novel, and it's not terribly grim, but it is a little bit sad. So It's not a novel that I would say is like the happiest type of novel to read, but if you like really great writing, if you've read the novel My Friend, that one was about, I believe, also an unnamed narrator who takes on this Great Dane after a beloved friend had passed on, and it's her relationship with the past friend and this dog. This one is very, very similar in writing style. You could probably finish it in a day. I don't want to say too much of what happens, but I find the writing just absolutely beautiful. I'm a huge fan of Sigrid Nunez's novels. She has won, I believe, the Man Booker Prize or one of the big prizes in the past for My Friend. So I keep picking up all of her novels as they are coming out. And I should be going back to other novels of hers that she's written earlier. But yeah, this novel, it's really good. Like I said, I don't want to give too much away. It is a very forward moving story. It does take a little bit to get to the point of where she does meet her college friend. So it takes a little bit of an investment. But if you really like great writing, shorter novels, something you want to pick up, you can also pick up, put down. This would probably be the novel for you. So I would highly recommend What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez.
Thank you both so much. Now we're going to hear from Hannah and our assistant director, Lauren Hynett, about a few books that they've been reading.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I'm the technology librarian at Fairport Public Library. I am going to tell you about a book I love today called The Bullet Journal Method by Ryder, Carroll. Now, before you change your channels or put me on mute or whatever, hear me out. I know that this bullet journal thing has been around for a long time, and it seems super intimidating to many people. However, the type of bullet journaling that we talk about in this book is not the crazy, beautiful, illustrated, fancy kind that you may have seen on Pinterest or Instagram. That is bullet journaling, but that's bullet journaling with a bunch of extra sauce that nobody really needs. So, if drawing and making your calendar and your schedule and your to-do list extra, extra beautiful are things that make you happy, then feel free to go all in with this. But if you read the book, you will have a solid understanding of the fact that we are here for function and not form. So, story behind my reading this book goes. About a year and a half ago, I was getting super overwhelmed with having my face staring at a screen all the time. I wanted to find a new way to disconnect from things that are digital. So I decided to start with my calendar, which I used all the time on my phone. I used Google Calendar, and I was always checking to see what I had to do that day, what appointments I had coming up, so on and so forth. I thought that if I could at least switch my calendar from digital to analog, it would help me cut a little bit of time out of staring at my phone screen. So that's what I did. But like I said earlier, I was one of those people who was super intimidated by the idea that a bullet journal had to be this beautiful, elaborate thing. So I checked out the book from my library and I read it cover to cover before I even decided to do any bullet journaling at all. And let me tell you, reading the book changed my mindset entirely about the matter. It really takes the stress out of it. It explains bullet journaling in simple, easy to use language, and it takes any pressure off you from the feeling that you have to make this a beautiful practice type of thing. So I've been bullet journaling for about a year now, and I love it. I will say that because I read this book, honestly, the book has changed my life because it allowed me to step away from my phone a little bit. And it was just the first of many changes that I made to kind of transition away from screens. I did bring an example with me again to help take the pressure off. This is not the bullet journal you have seen on Pinterest. Take a look at one of my weekly spreads. It's wild. There's so much going on. As you can see, it's a little bit messy. This is from back in March. And no pressure because it worked just the way it was supposed to work. Messy goodness and all. So if you're looking for a way to kind of de-digitize your life, I highly recommend checking out the Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, my name is Lauren Hynat, and I'm one of the assistant directors here at the Fairport Public Library. And today I'm going to be talking to you about A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer. This story is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which maybe some of you have read a lot of in the past, but I feel that this is different and totally worth your time. I do want to say it is not a standalone. It is a part of a series. It's the first of 3 books. But this author really grabs you from the beginning, and it's worth going on this journey with her. So our book opens with Harper, who is currently working as a lookout for her brother. As the story moves on, we come to discover that her family is kind of in a financial tough situation. They're in DC, and her father took off when they were babies. And her mother is currently sick and dying. And they've got the debts piling up. And one of the ways that her brother has felt he can help is by getting involved with a local gang and doing some of their dirty work. Harper has cerebral palsy, and it affects the way that she walks. She has somewhat of a limp, and some things can be hard for her to do. But she's no one to mess around with. So she's out there being a lookout for her brother who's doing something sketchy, and she just sees a man and a woman walking down the street, and it becomes clear to her pretty quickly that the young woman is being abducted. She is somewhat unconscious, isn't with it, and Harper makes the split-second decision to intervene to save this young woman, and goes after the man with, I believe, a tire iron. And in their tussle, she and him get teleported to this place called Emberfall. As it turns out, this man is actually the commander of an army of Emberfall within the kingdom. And this is where most of our story takes place. So even though there is the real world, this kind of takes place separately from our real world, and she is angry about it. They kind of lock her up right away, and she comes to find out that this commander, his name is Gray, he has been doing kind of the dirty work for the prince for years in trying to find someone to help the prince break the spell. They kind of ran through the ladies of the kingdom, and now they are casting their nets a little wider, and that's how Harper ended up getting involved. And this story is a little bit different in that the prince turns into the beast every year. So the year progresses along, and toward the end of the year, he turns into this monstrous, horrible beast who kind of terrorizes the kingdom and the local people who live nearby. But the people who live nearby just don't think that their prince or the kingdom are helping them. The nobility are helping them. They don't understand that it is one and the same person. And this kingdom, the castle and its grounds are kind of stuck in a time loop where the year resets, and the enchantress who put this spell on the prince and his kingdom gave it an expiration date, and they are currently operating within the final year of the curse. He has to figure out how to break the spell before the end of the year, or he will be stuck. He will turn into the beast and be stuck as the beast for the rest of his life. And that's where Harper comes in, and they hope that she can help break the spell. I don't want to give too much away, but I really loved this book. It was definitely different in that she, when she stops trying to run away and starts, creating relationships with the people within the kingdom, she starts to get more politically involved, and at one point is even helping create war strategies against other invading kingdoms. It's really different. It's really good. I loved it, and I hope you love it as much as I do. The name of this book again is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. I hope you check it out. And if you read it, come into the library and let's chat about it.
Thanks, ladies. Those both sound amazing. Next up is Karlie and Lauren Seaver, and they'll be telling us about their books.
Hi everyone, my name is Karrie Dennis. I'm the Teen Services Librarian, and today I'm going to do a review of The Best We Could Do. This is by T. Bowie. This is a graphic novel. It's a memoir. It's beautifully illustrated. It is 344 pages long, and you can read it in one sitting as the art takes up most of each page. T traces her family's journey through from Vietnam to the U.S. During the late 1970s, early 1980s. She actually starts the graphic novel with the birth of her own son in a hospital in the U.S. in the early aughts in 2003. She's overwhelmed with the responsibility of keeping her child alive during his first week of life, and this causes her to reflect back on what her parents went through while having 6 children, 2 who don't survive, during a time when their country was experiencing war, food shortages, poverty, shifting politics, and much, much more. We're introduced to each member of her family. She changed the names to protect their privacy. And then she dives into the individual stories of her parents. So first off, her father's life was very difficult. There's a lot of poverty, abuse, abandonment, inconsistent education, etc. Her mother's life was quite the opposite. Her family is very wealthy. She had a doting father, a very elegant and accomplished mother. She was put into the best schools all the way through to college. And then her parents meet at college. Her father had won a scholarship. And they meet at college, they get married. The world around them begins to shift even more quickly as the country is torn apart by war. They are put into survival mode for over a decade. They experience incredible poverty and violence, and all while trying to keep themselves and their children alive. So they eventually are able to smuggle themselves out of Vietnam to Malaysia. They live in a refugee camp. They're in the refugee camp, luckily for a short period of time, and are able to figure out a way to get themselves to the U.S. Initially, they come to Indiana, and the cold and snow in Indiana is a bit of a shock to their system, and then they eventually settle in California. So that was just a really quick general overview of the journey, but T does an incredible job of capturing each leg of this journey in this black and reddish color palette, and you're just really drawn into it. And there's so much that's like so heart-wrenching, but throughout, you just see them, they're survivors, and there's still a lot of hope as they go through. And T does a fantastic job of breaking down the history of Vietnam, like what happened before they were torn apart by war, the history with the French, as well as like what happens her parents, when her parents first meet, and while they're living there and trying to survive. And then also she tells what happens when her family does eventually leave. So I watched several interviews with T. Bowie, and she describes this as a letter to her parents, like a letter of appreciation. It was an art project that really allowed her to interview her parents and really empathize and get to why they are the way they are. It was a way for her to explore who her parents were before they became parents. And I just love that aspect of things. I love that, exploring who her parents are before they became parents. I think it's really important to do that, to really understand how that impacted their parenting or their own individual goals. In interviews, also another thing that he talks about is the importance of telling your story and how it helps other people to be vulnerable and tell their story. And of course, the main, one of the main themes of this story is it's an immigration story. It's a story of people coming from a country where they're experiencing tremendous difficulty and trying to find stability. And we see these stories every day. There's tremendous amount of people who are experiencing being in refugee camps and people being deported, and we have to see these people as just not numbers or stats, that they're human beings with names and histories and families, and this is just one story. I have this title in the teen space. You can see my teen sticker here. I think it's great for anyone who's grade 8 and higher. I see it as a great intergenerational read. So if you have a grandchild or a child or just a young person in your life, read it together. Talk about it. Share what's gone on in your life, in your journey. Draw it together. And so this concludes my review of The Best We Could Do by T. Bowie. And you can check it out on Hoopla, or you can come into the library and pick it up on our brown bag book review display. All right, bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Miss Lauren. I'm one of the children's librarians here at Fairport Public Library, and I thought I'd share with you a few children's books that I would recommend to read with the little ones in your life or alone. They're all great. So let's get started. The first one I want to talk about is called Worm Loves Worm by J.J. Austrian and illustrated by Mike Curato. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Now, first of all, it is June, it's Pride Month. And this book is a great way to celebrate Pride. It's a story of two worms who love each other. And I don't know what you know about worms, but worms don't have a sex or a gender. They're just worms. So these worms want to be married, and they're like, yeah, let's be married. But then a whole cast of characters come in with questions about, well, this isn't how we've always done it, but then the worms just always offer solutions of, things that can make things work. So for example, when they talk about how, oh, we don't have fingers. So or you don't have fingers. So how can you wear your wedding rings? And the worms say, we can wear them like belts. Wonderful. Now we can be married. And, there's just all sorts of fun. There's a lot of fun humor as well. Like the spider talking about how he might eat some of the other insects. And it's just a sweet story about inclusion and about making things your own way and not having to always follow the way things have always been done. And I just love this book. I read it every year in the spring because I love books that highlight insects, and I love books that celebrate love. So it's a good one. I highly recommend checking it out. The next book I wanted to talk about is Who Am I? An Animal Guessing Game by Steve Jenkins and Robin Page, who are a husband and wife team, and they're amazing. If you're ever looking for animal nonfiction, Steve Jenkins and Robin Page, you're gonna want to look for their books. I also want to point out something that we have here at Fairport Library. If you see in the nonfiction section a green and white sticker like this, that means that this book would be good to sit down and read with maybe a preschooler or a kid a little younger, a little older. They might be more story-like, and for myself, I'll think, oh, this would be good in a story time. So look out for that in the nonfiction section. I know there's a lot of books in there, and sometimes it can be hard to find the ones that are right for our littlest readers, but these are some of the good ones, okay? So This one's super fun with these beautiful Steve Jenkins illustrations. It's like a guessing game. So I have a sticky tongue, bumpy green skin, 2 bulging eyeballs, 10 webbed toes, a floating lily pad, and a fly for lunch. Who am I? And then, oh yes, I'm a frog. And the whole story goes through like this. It's a guessing game, and I just love guessing game books. And this would just be fun to read with your little ones and have them guess. So, and actually, it is a nonfiction book. And at the end, there are some facts all about these different animals that are highlighted in the story. And then as well as some more recommended reading to find out more about the animals. So another one that I love, Who Am I? An Animal Guessing Game. All right, I'm going to show you another nonfiction book, which is written by a local author, Joy Keller, who is amazing, and illustrated by Erica Salcedo. It's called Fungus is Among Us. And it's so fun. So it starts off, oh, look at all that fungus. It starts off with this child going for a walk. But what is, peering out? And it starts to talk about all of the different fungus that you might come upon. One of the things I love about this book, as well as lots of nonfiction books, there's a story going on here, but then there's facts, just built in, like fungi aren't plants. They're in a group of their own that includes mushrooms, molds, and yeasts, and then more facts here. So this story, as this child goes through and sees all sorts of different fungus outside, and then and you can see they're kind of scared, but then realizing that, oh my goodness, there's fungus at home. This makes me think of my refrigerator personally, and oh my gosh, in the shower. So it has the fungus being a little bit scary at first, but then as the child learns more that, like, oh gosh, dad adds mushrooms to our pizza, and that's okay, it's good for us, and it goes on to talk about, oh, yeast in the dough and all the ways that fungus is actually good, like helping to create the compost for our plants. And so then it goes into the benefits of fungus. So it's really a sweet, fun story with a little bit of drama, but it all gets cleared up at the end, and you see all of the ways that fungus is beneficial. And then it, as a great nonfiction book, it ends with this really cool section, Meet a Mycologist, with Dr. Sarah Branco is answering all these questions about fungi, and then a bibliography at the back. But I think this is a great book, and one that you and your kids will want to read over and over again. All right, I've got one more book I wanted to share with you. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It's just so fun. There's a Monster in Your Book, written by Tom Fletcher and illustrated by Greg Abbott. This book, wow, Tom Fletcher has multiple, there's a Something in Your Book books, and I love them. They're interactive and super fun. So when you're reading them, it's just like you're just having a good time. So here's this monster. Oh no, there's a monster in your book. Oh my gosh, what's it doing? Eating the pages. Jeez. Let's try to get him out. Shake the book and turn the page, and then you can shake. I just love this book because there's all sorts of actions going on. It's silly. You blow the monster out of the book. Oh gosh, he's blown away. You have to tilt the book. So this is just a wonderful interactive story. It's going to get you and any kids that you're reading it to laughing. You're going to have so much fun. And this is just one of many. There's a Something in Your Book books. So definitely check this out. I hope you've enjoyed learning about all these great children's books today, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you both. It's always nice to get a little look at something that we may not normally read. So I appreciate the graphic novel and the children's books. So next up, we have Martha, one of our clerks, and we have Sarah, who is our media librarian, and they're going to share their great reads with you.
Hi, folks. The book I've chosen to review with you today is titled Choose to Matter, Be Courageously and Fabulously You by Julie Foudy. Julie Foudy is a retired soccer midfielder, a Women's World Cup champion, and a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. She played for the United States women's national soccer team, and she co-founded the Judy Foudy Sports Leadership Academy, which is an organization focused on developing leadership skills in teenage girls. This is a nonfiction book. Depending on the library branch, you can find it in teen or adult section in the library. It's also available to read or listen to on Hoopla, and it can be found digitally at the New York Public Library. I listened to it, and it was quite entertaining. The hardcover book is colorful, and it has unique pages. In my book review, you will hear many of Julie's words and sentences that I have spoken verbatim from her book. So what's this book about? This book is about leadership. What does it take to be a leader, and how do we find the courage to be a leader? Julie says that she saw the need for a book for teen girls and young women that speaks to them about finding your voice, thinking differently, and empowering others. She says it's for a teenager who's starting her journey, or the woman at a critical fork in her journey. It's for every person who needs a little courage, for someone to tell them they can do it because you can. For this book, Julie interviewed 10 women and girls who share their life lessons and share their journeys of growth. She says they are people who push us to feel more and be more. People who encourage us to take off the label of what you think you should be and instead just be the person you want to be. We need these examples in our life so we are inspired to push ourselves forward. She writes about the takeaways she gleaned from her interviews with Good Morning America co-host Robin Roberts, soccer stars Mia Hamm and Alex Morgan, Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg, a teen Irish scientist, a Paralympic Games medalist, softball star Jessica Mendoza, an NCAA softball coaching legend, and a girl who was born with cerebral palsy, and a teen from Afghanistan. Julie's also included a variety of inspirational quotes from a diverse group of people. For example, from Lady Bird Johnson, become so wrapped up in something that you forget to be afraid. Eleanor Roosevelt, do one thing every day that scares you. And Dr. Seuss, be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. This book is also meant to be an interactive journal. There are specific exercises for you to journal. Julie encourages writing thoughts down to help us reflect on who we are and what matters to us. She feels that writing it makes it yours. And at the end of the book, the intention is to combine it all and then apply it to life. She wants us to know that leadership is in all of us, and leadership is about empowering others. We all have the potential to empower others. Be authentically you. We are meant to be different. Embrace that and go out and make a difference in the world, no matter how big or how small that difference is. Bye for now.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Bishop Veles and I'm the Media Services Librarian here at the Fairport Public Library. Today I have an outstanding fantasy series to recommend, The Witcher, written by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski. For those not already familiar with The Witcher from the Netflix TV series, The Witcher is about a monster hunter for hire by the name of Geralt of Rivia. Geralt travels from town to town seeking work, and while people seem more than willing to pay him to rid their towns of people-eating monsters, they also fear and despise him, for Geralt is a mutant, someone magically altered in childhood to have special powers. Geralt's only friends in the world appear to be his horse, Roach, and a hilarious bard by the name of Dandelion. Dandelion frequently follows Geralt around on his monster hunting expeditions in order to come up with new ballads to sing. Along the way, Geralt and Dandelion encounter angry djinn, vindictive sorcerers, monsters that are really humans under a curse, and plenty of humans that behave more like monsters. All right, that's all I'm going to say about the general plot, since I don't want to spoil it for everyone. Now, I want to go into some background information on the books themselves. Many of you may already be familiar with the popular Netflix TV series, The Witcher, and some of you may even be familiar with the video games. But before the TV show and before the games, there were these books written by Andrzej Sapkowski, which were recently translated into English. The Witcher began as a series of short stories published in a Polish sci-fi fantasy magazine in the mid-80s. And then the first book in the actual saga wasn't published until 1994. The reading order can be somewhat confusing, so I do want to go over it quickly. The first two books in the series are actually collections of short stories. The one everyone should start with is The Last Wish, introducing The Witcher. It is not the first book published, but it is the first in the overall timeline of the series, and it introduces us to our main character. The next short story collection to read is The Sword of Destiny. After this follows the 5 books containing the main saga, starting with The Blood of Elves and ending with The Lady of the Lake. There's also an 8th book, Season of Storms, that was published in English in 2018, and which is a standalone novel. I have seen some reviews online saying that this is an optional book and thus you can read it after you've read everything else. However, the events in Season of Storms take place sometime during The Last Wish, which is why many other reviewers suggest reading it before the 5 main books in the saga, if you read it at all. I myself haven't finished reading the second short story collection, The Sword of Destiny, at the time of this recording, but I already plan on reading Season of Storms next, since this seems to make the most sense to me. I guess I'll find out in the long run whether this order works or not. Also, one last note on reading order. If you're watching or have watched the Netflix series and you don't want spoilers for the second season, which is due to come out later this year, I would suggest not reading beyond the 2 short story collections and the standalone novel. Okay, on to why I like this fantasy series so much. First, I'm going to be honest, I started reading The Witcher with a fair amount of skepticism. I wasn't sure how great it would be since it is a translation, where a lot rides on the skill of the translator, and I also saw plenty of negative reviews saying it was kind of slow. But I love the Netflix series so much, and I just couldn't stand waiting for the second season to come out any longer, so I decided to give the books a shot, and I've been very happily surprised. I can't speak or read Polish, so I cannot compare the original to the English translation, but I feel like the translator for Last Wish, Danusia Stock, has done an excellent job. I can't tell that it's a translation, which is great. Although again, I don't have anything to compare to, so someone else could just as easily complain about it. The translator for the second book, Sword of Destiny, changes to David French, and while stylistically it is a tiny bit different, and I have noticed some sentences which are a bit cumbersome to read, it hasn't detracted from my enjoyment of the story. So far, I haven't found The Last Wish or The Sword of Destiny to be slow, but there is more dialogue than there is action. Now, the dialogue between characters is super engaging and often quite hilarious, and I really love how the author took what could have been a very dark fantasy series and juxtaposed it with these humorous interactions. I should mention at this point that much of the dialogue leans heavily towards British humor, and there's definitely some Middle English verbiage and spelling thrown in. This makes sense because the setting for The Witcher resembles medieval Europe, and also because both the translators are British themselves. But I just wanted to warn you, since I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. You might be pulling out a dictionary while you're reading. I definitely have. The other reasons why I love these books so much relate to the TV series, and I know this is a book review, but considering how well known the Netflix show is at this point, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't compare the two at least a little bit. So, for those of you who have already watched season 1 of the Netflix series, you'll be happy to learn this first season of The Witcher follows the 2 short story collections rather closely. The TV show doesn't include every single short story, which is understandable. I've also noticed some slight changes in certain scenes, and there are a couple stories in the show where the Netflix writers clearly extrapolated from certain things that were mentioned just briefly in the books. But for the most part, this is a really excellent book to TV adaptation. Of course, we'll have to see how Netflix does with the second season. If you've watched the first season of the TV show and you're hoping that the books will help you make sense of what was going on, Well, I'm not entirely sure they will help. Certainly, I found that being able to read the dialogue and taking my time to parse out exactly what was being said helped me understand what was going on better. But as for the confusing timeline, the first book, The Last Wish, isn't much help. The Last Wish consists of short stories, as I mentioned before, but each story is framed with a chapter called The Voice of Reason, which seems to be the Witcher, Geralt, thinking back on past events. The stories in between this framing device happened in the past, and I must admit it took me a few chapters to figure this out, just like it took me a few episodes of the TV show to figure out. So don't look to the books to help with the timeline necessarily. There is one thing that I definitely liked better in the books than in the TV series, and that is how Geralt's character is developed. For those of you who have watched the TV series, and even for those of you who may just be vaguely familiar with it, you've probably noticed that Geralt is pretty serious, almost deadpan character. This is likely because in the books it is mentioned several times that Witchers have all emotion trained out of them, and the Netflix writers took this to heart perhaps too much. In reality, Geralt in the books is a far more developed and thus more likable character. Many of the other characters we meet in the books will verbally justify their lousy treatment of Geralt because he supposedly has no feelings, or not like a human anyways. Of course, as you can probably guess, it is made very obvious in the books that Geralt has quite a few feelings indeed. This not so subtle jab at prejudice, bigotry, and racism in general seems to be an underlying theme throughout the books, or at least the two short story collections that I've read so far. To wrap up, I think this is an excellent series that anyone who enjoys fantasy, especially folklore, medieval fantasy, should read, whether you're interested in watching the TV show or not. The Witcher is filled with exciting action scenes, witty dialogue, and a host of interesting characters. These are definitely books that will be hard to put down, that will have you laughing out loud one moment and then thoroughly creeped out the next. So go grab a copy of the first book, The Last Wish, today. Thank you.
Next up, we have one of our wonderful substitutes, Joe, and one of our children room aides, Sarah, who will be sharing their books with you.
If you were in Rochester this spring, you might remember those long, dreary, rainy days. And it was on one of those days that I felt like I needed to escape. I needed to go someplace where the skies were blue and it was much warmer. And what I did was I picked up my Kindle and I did a search for someplace like that. I did a search for the Key West. And that's a destination I've never been, but just the thought of it warms me up, and I can taste the key lime pie. What I found was a series called Key West Capers by Lawrence Shames. And this is a 15-book series. What's interesting about it is that unlike most series, the main characters in this do not run through all 15 books. In fact, the characters in the first book don't appear in the second book. So be prepared to, if you fall in love with these characters, to let them go and move on to a new set of characters. The first book, called Florida Straits, is about a main character named Joey. And Joey is the illegitimate son of a mafia boss in New York City. And Joey feels like he doesn't fit in with his family or New York City. So he asks his girlfriend if they can pick up and move down to the Key West. And that's where Joey wants to start his own mafia-style racket. But what happens is that Joey doesn't quite understand the culture of the Key West. And when he goes to create his own racket, things just don't work out. And what I like about this story is that while it does have those mafia elements and mystery, I felt like it was more about the development, the transformation of Joey. He starts out as this rough, tough character, and then as the book progresses, you see how the Key West culture starts to soften him, and really start to feel like Joey is a quite adorable, likable character. So if you need to transport yourself to the Key West, and you want to meet a handful of colorful, enjoyable characters, I suggest this series. And as an interesting aside, the author was once approached by Donald Trump's people to ghostwrite a mystery series for Donald. And while that never happened, he did write a book called Money Talks, which is based on that request that he got. And that's what I want to read next.
Hi there, I'm Sarah Heisman and I work at the Children's Room in Fairport Public Library. Today I'm going to speak to you about a book called Troop 6000, the Girl Scout troop that began in a shelter and inspired the world, by Nikita Stewart. I have a little cheat sheet to the right of me. Now, I am not a big nonfiction reader. I love plot, I love stories, I love novels. I'm a big literary girl. But this book came across my path and it seemed like something I'd really be interested in. I was a Girl Scout about 25, 30 years ago, but I don't have a lot of experience with the organization. So I thought this book was really going to give me insight on how this specific troop came to be and to learn a bit more about the shelter system and homeless families in New York City. And it did that. It was really interesting to look behind the curtain of all the logistics and the bureaucracy of how families navigate resources if they are experiencing homelessness in New York. However, what I wasn't anticipating is getting to know a family. And you are brought into this world of Giselle Burgess and her family, and how time and time again she is faced with these hardships, one right after another. And it's not that it doesn't faze her, but she just takes them and she keeps moving forward to do everything that she can to try to carve out a bit of a better life for her children. And along the way, we learn about this Girl Scout troop, Troop 6000, which Giselle starts, and how somehow miraculously these different people are brought into her orbit to make this organization come to fruition. And it's really remarkable. I would highly recommend it. I was engrossed. I wanted to know more. I wanted to know what was happening, what the future of Giselle and her family and her daughters and the Girl Scouts were going to be. So I highly recommend it. It's inspiring, it's remarkable, and it's pretty amazing that this is a true story and it's happening right now. So give it a read, and if you're hungry, you can always support Troop 6000 and buy some Girl Scout cookies from them to keep you nourished while you read this book. So enjoy.
And last but not least, we have Tara and Lee from the Children's Room, and they're going to share their wonderful reads.
Hi, I'd like to share with you the first novel in the chilling Arc of a Scythe trilogy, Scythe by Neal Shusterman. Imagine a world with no hunger, no disease, no war, no misery. Humanity has conquered all those things. With the advances in medicine and technology, death has even been conquered. Feeling like you're getting too old? No problem. Just reset your age back to a desired age. Fall up a ladder and break your neck? No problem. A revival drone will swoop in to bring you to one of the many revival centers. With no timeline on life, there's an overpopulation problem. To thwart this, the Scythedom was born. Scythes are the only one who can end life, and they are commanded to do so. Killing is a word no longer used, but instead there is the act of gleaning. Each scythe is tasked with 260 unbiased gleanings per year by whatever mode of choice. Bowie knives, drowning, medieval weaponry, strangulation, poison. According to one scythe, Scythe Faraday, the way he chooses these people is entirely out of statistics. It is based on the most probable death that would occur during the mortal age. Being a scythe means that people either find excuses to avoid you or become over-friendly with the hopes of avoiding death. Citra and Rowan have been selected to join the Scythedom as apprentices, led by Scythe Faraday, a role that neither wants. We follow these characters on a journey that puts into question and pushes their values, beliefs, and morality. What was most appealing about this book was the style of writing. I think that writing this novel in third person was beneficial. It kept the novel more focused on the events, more than simply the characters themselves. I really enjoyed the points of view of those who were to be gleaned, to see how an individual would react to a death that they could not prepare for but must succumb to at any split second. I found the world building in this novel to be pretty much perfect. We are introduced to it slowly, and it is built upon as the story progresses in a way that does not get too overwhelming for the reader, but rather where the reader grasps it perfectly and falls right into it. Like most dystopian novels, at the end of Scythe, we see the world shaken up by new ideas and the potential for change. I cannot recommend Scythe and Neal Shusterman enough, and I hope you too will enjoy this series as much as I have, multiple times. Happy reading!
Hi everyone, my name is Lee, and I'm one of the children's room aides at Fairport Public Library. Today I'd like to share with you an incredible story called The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen. The Magic Fish is Trung's debut graphic novel and intricately weaves different versions of classic fairy tales with a story about a mother and son trying to connect across a language barrier. Tien, the main character, is a young Vietnamese American boy who reads fairy tales with his immigrant mother to improve her English literacy. As a German version of Cinderella unfolds at the beginning of the story, we get glimpses of Tien's mother's past when she fled her homeland. We also see Tien struggling to share something important with his mother, something for which there is no word in Vietnamese. Tien is gay. He puts off telling his mother when a family emergency arises, and we next see a Vietnamese version of Cinderella unfold. The impact of the culture on how the fairy tale plays out is poignant, and the author uses classic fairy tales to share immigrants' experiences, and is very powerful. The last fairy tale is a version of The Little Mermaid. The author writes that he chose it because the strong sense of feeling out of place in a new world is rather like the immigrant experience. However, the connection to Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote the most popular Western version of the story, and how he used the story to write a love letter to another man, feels very important to the story. It is at this moment, during the story of The Little Mermaid, that Tien will learn if his mother will love and accept him for who he knows himself to be. The beautiful artwork, changing scenery, and variations in fashion ties together a story of family, borders, language, and love. I highly recommend that you check out The Magic Fish, the debut graphic novel by Trung Le Nguyen, who is a panelist at this year's Teen Book Festival here in Rochester.
Thank you both, and thank you all for joining us today. That is all the reviews that we have. But please come into the library to check out these books. We will have our big display across from the information desk back, so you'll be able to take all of these gems out and read them for yourselves. So we're so happy to be open our full hours again, and we hope to see you in the library soon, and we will catch you at the next Brown Bag.